Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
One of the worst fears a parent can have is that their child will be kidnapped by a stranger. In 2015, a Washington television station launched an awareness campaign with the hashtag every 90 seconds, arguing that on average, in America, a child disappears every minute and a half. These data are based on a study carried out in 2002, funded by the Department of Justice. A total of 797,500 children were reported missing throughout the country. Although the figure may sound impressive, the reality is quite different. The vast majority of these minors were found by the police, by their parents, or they themselves returned home after a few hours. Only 115 of these 797,500 children were actually kidnapped. Otherwise, this problem seems to have decreased over the last 20 years. Possibly the late technology and the use of cell phones have been beneficial for those parents who years ago were unable to locate their children when they were away from home for too long. Even so, when a child disappears in America, all the alarms go on. The countless cases of pedophiles and murderers who kidnapped minors during much of the 70s, 80s, and 90s have left an indelible mark on their community. That's why, when Susansmith appeared on television screens begging for her children to be returned to her in October 1994, the entire country came to a standstill. Michael and Alexander Smith, aged 3 years and 14 months respectively, had been kidnapped. But the outcome of this story would be unimaginable. On the night of October 25, 1994, in Union, South Carolina, 911 received a call from a young man alerting the police of the kidnapping of 2 small children. Susansmith, 23, the mother of the minors, had knocked on the door of his house to ask for help, while several patrols headed to the scene. Smith described the suspect as a black man, about 30 or 40 years old and approximately 6 feet tall. According to her statements, she stopped at an intersection with a red light when the individual entered her vehicle and threatened her with a gun. They drove a couple of kilometers until he forced her to get out, and before the woman could open the back doors to get his children who were sitting in their baby seats, the subject accelerated and fled. Smith ran to the nearest house and asked for help at the McLeod family home, who made the call to 911. All units were informed to be on the lookout for a red Mazda car that could be circulating in the area. The officers combed the woods and walked the roads in the hope that the kidnapper had left the children abandoned somewhere. But the search was useless. The next day, in addition to the state police, the FBI joined in the search for the minors, and the abduction of Michael and Alexander Smith became national news. Millions of Americans were able to see how the grieving parents, Susan and David Smith, appeared on television. The young couple made a call before the cameras so that the kidnapper would return her children and not harm them. Susansmith herself provided the press and the police with several photographs and some videotapes in which they appeared playing with her, which were reproduced in all the news programs. The case immediately shocked the entire nation, and hundreds of people joined the search. Thousands of flyers were distributed, describing the red Mazda owned by Susansmith and the spoken portrait of the alleged kidnapper. But all efforts were in vain. The investigators also did not get any clues during the first 2 days, and that began to make them nervous. It is known that the first 48 hours are crucial for any investigation. They did not even obtain a sighting of the vehicle, which was too strange. Both the police and the FBI began to suspect that Susansmith was hiding information from them, because some of her statements were inconsistent and even contradictory. During the interrogations, the woman had said that that night she was going to a friend's house with her 2 children. However, it was proven that on October 25th, Susan's friend was not at home, and that they had not agreed on any visit. There was also a peculiarity at the crossroads where she said she had been approached by the suspect, and that is that the traffic light only changed to red if there was traffic from the side, since it worked with sensors. In her statement, Susansmith stated that there were no vehicles in the vicinity at that time. She also mentioned having gone shopping at a Walmart around 9 at night, but no employee remembered seeing her or her 2 children. Furthermore, the description she gave of the suspect was extremely generic, so much that the black community of Union began to feel uncomfortable, and they complained to the authorities about harassment by some law enforcement officers. It was then when the police decided to subject Susan and David Smith to the polygraph test. The results only confirmed the suspicions of the investigators. Susan failed practically all the questions and became the main suspect. The interrogations continued, but the woman insisted on her version of the events. During the following days, the information was leaked to the press, and news of the inconsistencies in Susan's story began to spread. However, she appeared before the cameras for the second time, along with her husband, requesting the kidnapper to return her children, once again awakening the public's compassion. It was difficult not to empathize with the young couple. Several sources confirmed that Susan was an excellent mother and never mistreated her children. The entire community was with her, just like his family.
It hurts to know that that I would be accused or even thought that I would ever do anything to harm my children. As a mother, it's only a natural instinct to protect your children from any harm. And the hardest part of this whole ordeal is not knowing if your children are getting what they need to survive. And it hurts real bad.
But after this second public appearance, some began to notice something strange. In the images broadcast on television, while David Smith's face reflected absolute bewilderment, Susan was crying bitterly, but without tears, and she could even be seen smiling at times, something completely out of place. Considering the situation, this detail caught the attention of the police and even the journalists who were covering the news, and skepticism around the kidnapping story increased, although taking this position became extremely unpopular. Years later, a reporter would remember that Susansmith began to cry just before he interviewed her. For another interview given to television, that was the only time he saw her with tears in her eyes. Minutes later, when the interview ended, the woman automatically regained her composure. The search intensified and dives were carried out in nearby lakes and rivers, in search of the vehicle or the bodies of the miners, but nothing was found. By then, the country was shocked by the case, and prayer vigils were organized for the children of the Smith family. But after 8 days of waiting, the chances of finding them alive were already quite slim. David and Susan Smith gave an exclusive interview to CBS on a morning program hosted by journalist Harry Smith, and defended themselves against the police's suspicions. Both were sitting and holding hands, while Susan said that she did not understand what the agents were referring, with the inconsistencies around her statement. The day before, Susan's house had been searched by detectives, looking for evidence. David defended his wife, assured that she was an excellent mother and that he blindly believed in her. At the same time, Susan said that she was not hiding anything, and that he would never be able to harm his own children. Both were married, but had separated and were living independently. Despite everything, this misfortune had brought them together, and they accompanied each other during the process. After 9 days of intense search, both the police and the FBI decided to change their strategy. They were convinced that Susansmith was hiding something and decided to pressure her. After a tense interrogation, the truth came to light. The woman broke down and confessed to a monstrous crime. On the night of October 25th, Susansmith drove with her 2 children sitting in the back of the red Mazda along a rural road that led to Lake John D. Long. The children were in their respective baby seats, and with seatbelts, Susan approached the boat ramp, got out of the car, released the handbrake, and activated an automatic lever. In the middle of the darkness, the vehicle began to sink slowly, until it disappeared completely. Michael and Alexander, who were asleep, may have woken up when water began to seep in. On November 3, 1994, Union County Sheriff Howard Wells held a packed press conference announcing that Susan Smith had been arrested for the murder of her 2 children. The statements perplexed those present, many of whom began to sob after hearing the news. Others, however, were outraged. Even though John D. Long Lake had been previously inspected, this time they were counting on the confession of Susan Smith, and several dives were made, until they managed to find the vehicle. One of the divers in charge remembered diving with a flashlight and glimpsing the hand of one of the miners, resting on one of the windows. Finally, the car was brought to the surface with the remains of the children inside. Forensic examinations confirmed that Michael and Alexander were alive when their mother let them sink into the lake, and both drowned. Susansmith went from being the victim of a tragedy to becoming one of the most hated women in all of America. The question was, why had she done it? Many of the people who knew her could not understand what had happened. She was described as a happy, outgoing woman, a good neighbor, and an excellent mother. But despite appearances, her life was much more stormy than everyone around her could imagine.
and you guys have got to be strong.
The tale of Susansmith and her missing children captivated and horrified the nation for 9 long days. She claimed a black carjacker drove off in her Mazda on a dark South Carolina road, the 2 toddlers strapped in the back seat. The search expanded nationwide as Smith and her estranged husband, David, pleaded for their return.
Your mama loves you so much, and your daddy, this whole family love you so much.
Susansmith has been arrested and will be charged with 2 counts of murder in connection with the deaths of her children, Michael 3 and Alexander 14 months.
Smith confessed to rolling her car into a lake while the boys slept in their car seats. She said she'd intended to kill herself in part over a failed love affair and wanted her boys with her so they wouldn't suffer without her. But she didn't carry through on the suicide, and letters revealed the former boyfriend had told her he was not ready to be a father to her children. And so a town and a country that had ached for Michael and Alex's safe return wept with loss and betrayal.
She was born in Union, South Carolina on September 26, 1971. She was the youngest of the 3 children of the marriage between Linda Harrison and Harry Vaughn. Very little is known about her childhood. Other than that, she did well in school. When she was 7 years old, his parents divorced, and 3 weeks after the separation, her father committed suicide by shooting himself in the head. That would mark her deeply, and she became a much more withdrawn girl, despite the traumatic experience. Only a few months passed before Linda, her mother, remarried. Beverly Russell, a successful local businessman, became her new husband. This man represented everything Linda had aspired to in her life. The marriage was accompanied by an increase in social status, which is how they went to live in an elegant house located in an exclusive neighborhood of Union. The children's mother thought that the change would be beneficial for her children, but for Susan, everything was too dizzying, plunged into Great Depression. She attempted suicide at the age of 13 after ingesting several pills. That episode seemed to have been an anecdote, because after her recovery, Susan resumed her activities normally. She was a dedicated student, a good performer, and relatively popular at school. But in 1987, when she turned 16, she spoke to her mother and denounced her stepfather for sexual abuse, despite the fact that Russell was removed from the house, and the girl underwent various interviews with psychologists. Finally, everything came to nothing. Shortly after, the man returned home without receiving any type of punishment. At the same time, Susan's mother was embarrassed by the situation, but did not end her marriage, allowing the abuse to continue for years. During her adolescence, Susan had several romantic relationships with different men, but none of them prospered. At the age of 17, she became pregnant and had an abortion. A year later, she committed her second suicide attempt. Despite her emotional problems, she was hardworking and ambitious. In all the jobs she had, she managed to get promoted. In part because she was also quite manipulative. It was then that she began a romance with David Smith, a co-worker. The relationship grew stronger until they married on March 15, 1991, shortly after. Their first child, Michael, was born. They were a young couple and seemed to have a promising future, but the reality was very different. David felt uncomfortable because Susan spent a lot of money on unnecessary things, and his mother-in-law, Linda, interfered too much in the relationship. He also discovered that his wife was unfaithful to him, and he left home on several occasions, but they always ended up reconciling. The birth of their second son, Alexander, in August 1993, seemed like a glimmer of hope for the family, but David rented an apartment and left just 3 weeks later. Still, the separation was relatively friendly. David could visit his children whenever he wanted, and Susan had no qualms if he wanted to spend a little more time with them. The children were well cared for and enjoyed the affection of both parents. Shortly after, Susan got a job at one of the largest textile companies in the area, called Conso, and became an executive secretary. After being promoted from the accounting area, there she would meet Tom Findlay, 27, the son of the company's owner, one of the most coveted bachelors in Union. In addition to his great fortune, he had a reputation for being a gallant and charismatic guy. So Susan did not hesitate to use her charms to seduce him until in January 1994, they started a relation. At the same time, she was reconciling with Davis, but finally asked for a divorce. A couple of months passed, and Susan seemed extremely enthusiastic about her new love affair. But on October 17th of that same year, everything ended. Tom Findlay sent her a letter in which he explained his reasons for ending the relationship. This is the letter Tom sent.
Dear Susan, I hope you don't mind, but I think clearer when I am typing. So this letter is being written on my computer. This is a difficult letter for me to write because I know how much you think of me. And I want you to know that I am flattered that you have such a high opinion of me. Susan, I value our friendship very much. You are one of the few people on this earth that I feel I can tell anything. You are intelligent, beautiful, sensitive, understanding, and possess many other wonderful qualities that I and many other men appreciate. You will, without a doubt, make some lucky man a great wife. But unfortunately, it won't be me. Even though you think we have much in common, we are vastly different. We have been raised in two totally different environments, and therefore think totally different. That's not to say that I was raised better than you or vice versa. It just means that we come from two different backgrounds. When I started dating Laura, I knew our backgrounds were going to be a problem. Right before I graduated from Auburn University in 1990, I broke up with a girl, Allison, that I had been dating for over 2 years. I loved Allison very much, and we were very compatible. Unfortunately, we wanted different things out of life. She wanted to get married and have children before the age of 28, and I did not. This conflict spurred our breakup, but we have remained friends through the years. After Allison, I was very hurt. I decided not to fall for anyone again until I was ready to make a long commitment. For my first 2 years in union, I dated very little. In fact, I can count the number of dates I had on one hand. But then Laura came along. We met at Conso, and I fell for her like a ton of bricks. Things were great at first and remained good for a long time, but I knew deep in my heart that she was not the one for me. People tell me that when you find the person that you will want to spend the rest of your life with, you will know it. Well, even though I fell in love with Laura, I had my doubts about a long and lasting commitment. But I never said anything, and I eventually hurt her very, very deeply. I won't do that again. Susan, I could really fall for you. You have so many endearing qualities about you, and I think that you are a terrific person. But like I have told you before, there are some things about you that aren't suited for me, and yes, I am speaking about your children. I'm sure that your kids are good kids, but it really wouldn't matter how good they may be. The fact is, I just don't want children. These feelings may change one day, but I doubt it. With all of the crazy, mixed-up things that take place in this world today, I just don't have the desire to bring another life into it. And I don't want to be responsible for anyone else's children either. But I am very thankful that there are people like you who are not so selfish as I am and don't mind bearing the responsibility of children. If everyone thought the way that I do, our species would eventually become extinct. But our differences go far beyond the children issue. We are just two totally different people, and eventually those differences would cause us to break up. Because I know myself so well, I am sure of this. But don't be discouraged. There is someone out there for you. In fact, it's probably someone that you may not know at this time, or that you may know but would never expect. Either way, before you settle down with anyone again, there is something you need to do. Susan, because you got pregnant and married at such an early age, you missed out on much of your youth. I mean, 1 minute you were a kid, and the next minute you were having kids. Because I come from a place where everyone had the desire and the money to go to college, having the responsibility of children at such a young age is beyond my comprehension. Anyhow, my advice to you is to wait and be very choosy about your next relationship. I can see this may be a bit difficult for you because you are a bit boy crazy, but as the proverb states, good things come to those who wait. I am not saying you shouldn't go out and have a good time. In fact, I think you should do just that. Have a good time and capture some of that youth that you missed out on. But just don't get seriously involved with anyone until you have done the things in life that you want to do first. Then the rest will fall in place. Susan, I am not mad at you about what happened this weekend. Actually, I am very thankful. As I told you, I was starting to let my heart warm up to the idea of us going out as more than just friends. But seeing you kiss another man put things back into perspective. I remembered how I hurt Laura, and I won't let that happen again. And therefore, I can't let myself get close to you. We will always be friends, but our relationship will never go beyond that of friendship. And as for your relationship with B. Brown, of course you have to make your own decisions in life. But remember, you have to live with the consequences also. Everyone is held accountable for their actions, and I would hate for people to perceive you as an unreputable person. If you want to catch a nice guy like me one day, you have to act like a nice girl. And you know, nice girls don't sleep with married men. Besides, I want you to feel good about yourself, and I am afraid that if you sleep with B. Brown, or any other married man for that matter, you will lose your self-respect. I know I did when we were messing around earlier this year. So please, think about your actions before you do anything you will regret. I care for you, but also care for Susan Brown, and I would hate to see anyone get hurt. Susan may say that she wouldn't care his husband had an affair, but you and I know that is not true. Anyhow, as I have already told you, you are a very special person. And don't let anyone tell you or make you feel any different. I see so much potential in you, but only you can make it happen. Don't settle for mediocre in life. Go for it all and only settle for the best. I do. I haven't told you this, but I am extremely proud of you for going to school. I am a firm believer in higher education. And once you obtain a degree from college, there is not stopping you. And don't let these idiot boys from Union make you feel like you are not capable or slow you down. After you graduate, you will be able to go anywhere you want in this world. And if you ever wanted to get a good job in Charlotte, my father is the right person to know. He and Coney know everyone who is anyone in the business world in Charlotte. And if I can ever help you with anything, don't hesitate to ask. Again, you will always have my friendship. And your friendship is one that I will always look upon with sincere affection. Tom, P.S. It's late, so please don't count off for spelling or grammar.
The letter turned out to be devastating for her, and Susan did not take long to react. She confronted him and tried to get his attention, revealing that she had been sexually abused by her stepfather during her adolescence. Later, she confessed that she had had sexual relations with her father, the owner of Conso, trying to victimize himself. During the following days, Susan tried to devise a way to regain contact with Tom, but the young man simply ignored her. On October 25th, she left work early and picked up her 2 children from daycare. She met up with a friend and told him about her breakup while they were talking in a parking lot. She asked him to take care of her children for a few minutes, to pay a visit to Tom Findlay's office, but he quickly sent her away. The woman was driving aimlessly with Michael and Alexander in the back of the vehicle, until around 8 p.m., she headed to Lake John D. Long. And it is precisely at this point that the story becomes diffuse. Susansmith assured that she wanted to commit suicide with his 2 children, but that she chickened out at the last minute and got out of the car as it plunged into the water. In fact, this would be the official version of his statement. But it does not explain why she didn't try to help them. It is more likely that she tried to get rid of them, because they represented a hindrance to his love life. Susansmith was a depressive woman who had experienced various traumatic events and suffered from emotional deficiencies. But she was also manipulative, lying, narcissistic, and excessively dependent on her romantic relationships. She tried to deceive the entire country, inventing the story of the kidnapping, hoping to get out of it without punishment. Michael and Alexander Smith were buried in the Bogensville Methodist Church Cemetery on the 6th of November, 1994, inside the same coffin. The funeral, televised for the entire country, attracted more than 5,000 people who came to give their condolences. The images of Davis Smith, crying bitterly, were simply heartbreaking. The young father still did not know how to react to what had happened. As the months passed and the trial approached, the press began to speculate about a possible death sentence for the murderous mother. Newsweek magazine published an article in which she claimed that the woman could see how 3-year-old Michael was looking out the window of the vehicle when it was sinking. One of Susansmith's lawyers, David Brooke, denied this version and was skilled enough to turn it in his favor, ensuring that lies were being invented. To judge his client early, the trial began in 1995, and Susansmith pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity during the crime. While the prosecution requested the death penalty for the accused, the evidence against her was overwhelming. But attorneys David Brooke and Judy Clark presented a mental health expert for the defense, who diagnosed her with dependent personality disorder and severe depression. At the same time, she assured that he was not aware of his actions. When she murdered his children, his sad childhood was also brought to light, with the early loss of his father, the abuse she suffered from his stepfather, and his 2 attempts of suicide. All the prosecution's efforts to prove that Susansmith was aware of what she was doing were useless. They tried to appeal to her lewd behavior with other men, or her impulsive spending, to portray her as an evil woman. But they did the defense a favor, since that only contributed to confirming her supposed mental illness. Possibly the most shocking and painful moment of the process was when the prosecution presented a video made by the police, in which the immersion of the vehicle in the lake was recreated. A camera was placed inside the car, where the kids should be, while it plunged into the water. It took more than 5 minutes to completely sink. The jury was able to see firsthand what Michael and Alexander experienced during their last minutes of life. Many of those present began to cry, including Susansmith. On July 25, 1995, and after 2.5 hours of deliberation, the jury returned its verdict. Susansmith was found guilty of the murder of Michael and Alexander and sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after serving 30 years in prison. The community was outraged by the jury's decision. The majority demanded the death penalty. Her husband David gave a conference in which he expressed his regret. "I will never forget what Susan did, and I will never forget Michael and Alex. My family and I are disappointed that the death penalty was not the final verdict." David Smith agreed to be interviewed on the famous Oprah show, starring in one of the most dramatic television moments, moving the host to tears and millions of viewers. Sometime later, he managed to rebuild his life. He remarried and had 2 children. Today, Susansmith is still behind bars, but she could be released this year, 2024, at the age of 53. The specialists who have treated her assure that she shows no signs of repentance, and during her stay in prison she has only caused problems. She had sexual relations with 2 prison officers, who were later discharged. She was accused of consuming drugs, and tried to commit suicide by cutting her wrists. In addition, she manipulates other inmates at will and constantly tries to attract attention. In 2015, she sent a letter to the newspaper The State, where she explained to journalist Harrison Cahill what happened on October 25, 1994. This is the letter that she sent.
Dear Mr. Cahill, I know it is very late in writing you, but I wanted to still let you know that I did not receive your request for information until November 20th, 2014. A month after the 20-year anniversary, your letter was sent to the SCDC Correspondence Review Committee and was not approved until November 19th, 2014. I imagine that was done on purpose. I wanted to let you know that I would have most likely responded to your letter because I have yet been able to speak on my behalf. It has been hard to listen to lie after lie and not be able to defend myself. It's frustrating to say the least. Mr. Cahill, I am not the monster society thinks I am. I am far from it. Something went very wrong that night. I was not myself. I was a good mother, and I love my boys. The thing that hurts me the most is that people think I hurt my children in order to be with a man. That is so far from the truth. There was no motive, as it was not even a planned event. I was not in my right mind. The only reason I lied is because I didn't know how to tell the people who loved Michael and Alex that they would never see them again. I didn't want to hurt them. I knew the truth would come out, but I had planned to kill myself first and leave a note behind telling what had happened. I didn't believe I could face my family when the truth was revealed. This is only a small piece of the story, but I did want to tell you that if you're ever interested in doing another article, please let me know. In the meantime, take care of yourself. Sincerely, Susan.
Well, we get to the end. If you liked this video, consider leave your like, subscribe, and share it. This would help me a lot to continue uploading this type of content. Also, leave a comment, and I will try to read and respond to all of them, as I want to learn how to produce better content. See you in the next video.